All right. Good to see so many great faces here. Let me get off screen share and say what's up. Hello, everyone. Michael Irving, I remember you and your oyster farm. Very cool. Miguel, Jason Sharp. Good to see everyone. It looks like we have a really great representation again. Really packed day. Just one guest this time, but still lots of content to cover. So we're going to jump right in, just scrolling through and seeing all the names. So fun to see. All right, let's get into it. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up all around. Amazing. So, welcome everyone. This is day 2 of our fundraising workshop. It's really awesome to see a lot of names returning, some new names in here, but let's get right into it. Okay. So, here's a quick agenda of what we're trying to get through. We don't have tons of time together, so we're going to try to be really efficient with this. We'll start with a recap of last time just to make sure everyone is on the same page before building on top of that. We'll then get into the next meaty topic where I'm going to introduce some concepts, but we'll go quickly into looping in Jesse. I'll give a little bit more on Jesse when he comes on stage, but really excited to have Jesse Pujji with us. Just a wealth of information and insight. Then kind of not at the end, we're going to carve out time for Q&A, just a few questions with Jesse and myself based on the topic. And then the last 2 things I really want to make sure we get time with is running you guys through an exercise relevant to the stuff that we're going to be going through. Okay. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a comment around community and network. This was the graph of the attendees from last time. Awesome to see all the major regions represented. Obviously, we're very heavily USA and North America, but a strong contingent from LATAM. And just wanted to say, this is the start of things. Both Elizabeth and Mac talked about networking, about meeting people and how important that is. Just a reminder that no one does this well on their own. People will do it on their own, but no one does this well on their own. And it takes a village to do this really well. Get yourself out of your comfort zone, go to events like this, meet people. Happy to be a little trigger point to building a community, but it's going to be on you guys to follow up and see people that you find interesting that you think you could be helpful for, not the other way around. Okay. So this is a 3-part workshop. The first day we spent a lot of time talking about what this new reality was, setting a baseline, making sure people didn't run into the problems of doing what they thought people were doing in 2020 through 2022. Today, we're working on this idea of clearing a higher bar. I just wanted to point out the reason these workshops are formatted the way they are. I got some feedback that some people were frustrated that maybe the content was a little bit shallow, not super tactical, as tactical as it could be in that first workshop. Just want to remind everyone, we only have an hour together. I don't have a lot of time to be setting up exercises and workshops and homeworks with y'all. And the thing that I see, the problem that I see and the mistake that I see people making a ton is rushing towards tactics, rushing towards, Jason, what would the email look like that I send to ask for an intro without understanding why you do it that way. And when I talked about this before, but if anyone tries to teach you tactics before giving you the first principles, you will be an automaton, a robot that tries to follow a very specific set of rules. And almost every time you go out to do it, it'll be different. It'll be slightly different and you'll freeze up. You won't actually know what to do. There's this concept of slow down to speed up. I'm a big supporter of that. And so I would encourage you guys to try to take in the first principles that we're teaching here and realize that some people are at different levels and we're trying to get everyone advanced as much as possible. Okay. Moving on. I know this is a lot of content. I'm trying to get through it quickly just to get to Jesse. So what was the recap for the people that missed us the first time? We learned that for a long time, things went up and they kept going up and they kept going up and then they crashed. That's the recap. But people didn't realize what was happening and why they changed. And so a lot of founders that the 3 of us, Elizabeth, Mac, and I have been talking to, go into it not really knowing what else to do. So they default back to the mental models of 2020 to 2022. I think the big thing we talked about was that things are going to take more time. Valuations are likely going to be depressed. And so the way we came back from that is Elizabeth saying, look, there's going to be a higher bar. She pushed for tighter processes, for tighter narratives, for more differentiation. And then that just underlining again, VCs are not going to react to what they react to before. Before they were reacting to just, here's the deal. By the way, we might have a token and term sheets by Monday, please. It sounds crazy, but that was happening. That's no longer going to be the case. So we have to get ready for what it means to clear a higher bar. I just wanted to share this meme because while it is a meme, and I showed it last time, it is weirdly accurate. Like this whole throwing darts thing, I saw it way too much, especially with the smaller funds, the SPVs and the angels. And I do see people really leaning into the diligence thing. So there is going to be a higher bar. Let's get ready for it. So higher bar. What do people think a higher bar means? Actually, I'm getting a note from, I did want to send a question in. I'm going to break the flow here because when I was talking about building a community, I did want to say one thing. Yesterday, I started watching We Crashed, which is a show about WeWork. And I wanted to know what the rest of the world was listening to, watching when it came to stories and TV shows about the startup network. So, Jonathan, will you throw up that poll really quick? And this is my attempt to get people to engage because I am going to start asking questions. And I'll start by asking a simple question and then I'll still building a little community. Let's just spend 30 seconds getting some answers here. Wow. A lot of people are like me and have not really watched these. Okay. People are still voting. Great. Okay. Let's end the poll there and share results. Yeah. Let's see. So 24% of you, the highest, have been watching We Crashed, which I don't know if you guys also found it to be crazy, but like the personality of Adam Newman, at least as it's represented, is wild. Okay. Maybe in the Zoom chat, as you guys throw in what you liked, what you didn't like, this will stimulate you to answer more questions in the future, but also engage with each other. Okay. So let me rewind. I know I was building up a lot of momentum for this, but remind you about this meme. Talk about higher bars. But higher bar is a really, really vague term. What is a higher bar? And you saw me pushing Elizabeth and Mac last time. I was like pushing them because it's too easy, especially for venture capitalists, to be honest, to just use vague terms. Oh, you're too early. Things are going to be slightly easier. You're going to need to reach a higher bar. And this is what I think founders believe higher bar means. It's greater expectations. Like, what's the number going to be? What is the number that I need to reach? I hear this all the time. It's like, oh, what's the MRR number that I need? And then they think more diligence. Okay, so what else do I need in the data room? And those are specific examples of greater expectations and more diligence. But I think the way to frame it for yourself that you really should be thinking through is that venture capitalists, when they get into investing, are going to need more comfort around the deal. Like before, people were rushing in and kind of like, oh God, I'm going to miss something. I want to encapsulate that more around comfort. Like, how do you make a venture capitalist more comfortable, more interested in doing your deal? The interest side of things is on the excitement level, which is like before it could be like, hey, maybe this person is doing something and maybe they'll pivot into offering a token and then I'll get some liquidity. Okay, I'll do it. Now I think the bar for around differentiation and where your company could get to is much higher. So you need to be able to excite people around what the future looks like, what you could actually get to. And the analogy that I used around fundraising, which I find to be very accurate, I just started using this recently. So a lot of you haven't heard me talking about this, is this idea of investors skydiving. Some of you might have read my essay on this, but I did want to walk people through this because while at first blush, it might seem like this is not going to be useful, it's incredibly accurate on so many phases of fundraising, but we'll talk about the first ones. So what is investor skydiving? Investor skydiving is this concept that as an investor thinks about doing deals, it's like they're thinking about skydiving and the founder is running a skydiving outfit. So if you think about it, would you, as somebody thinking about skydiving, see a shop that just opened up? You know nothing about it other than it's a shop that skydives. And you're like, oh, they're like, hey, we're interesting. We're a great skydiving shop. Come skydive with us. Let's go tomorrow. It's not really, right? There's a lot of risk associated with skydiving. And so the founder that is able to build credibility around who they are and why they're doing it and why they're a safe and more comfortable place to go skydiving with will be able to attract the investor to think about skydiving with them. But it doesn't end there. There is more steps that the founder needs to take in order to make sure they get on board and get going. So as the investor gets enough excitement to visit the shop and think about skydiving, we're talking about first meetings and we're talking about getting people interested. It's all of a sudden this game of, all right, now that I have the investor with me and excited to go up in this plane, I need to run this process. I need to tell them the right information to get them on the plane with me. And then when we're up in the plane, we can't just keep circling around, getting higher and higher so that people get more like knowledgeable about how high off the ground we are. What could happen if something went wrong? Is this plane actually certified? Does this parachute actually fit me? Can I get some more information about how old this parachute is? Can I like call a partner to ask you a little bit more about how good you are at skydiving? And then you keep circling. What I'm talking through here is this idea of like people getting scared of doing deals. And so what we're talking about here is how do you meet a bar and how do you get a deal done? A lot of it looks like investor skydiving. So we're going to talk about how do we do the initial stuff that takes an investor and gets them comfortable with your shop? How do you get them into your place, get them considering getting on the plane, get them excited about what you're going to show them? And then later on, we'll talk about how you actually get them to jump out that plane with you and make the investment. So that's investor skydiving. And we have an essay on that probably delivers that better than I did just there. But let's move on, because I just want to make sure Jesse's here. Is Jesse here? Do you want to see if we can take him off mute? Jesse, are you there?
Guys, good afternoon.
Hey, Jesse, how are you, man? Where in the world are you?
I'm in St. Louis in our co-working space.
Very cool. So you did move out of San Francisco. It's been a long time. I wanted to first talk a little bit about Jesse, just so you know who you're talking to. If you remember before, introduced myself, introduced Elizabeth, introduced Mac, not because I wanted to brag about any of those people, but because I think it's really important to get some of the context behind what you're about to hear. So it's not just a talking head, and then you can decide whether or not what I say or what Jesse says is something that is worth your following. I met Jesse probably almost 10 years ago when I was a VC and Jesse was running Ampush as his main business. But since then, it's been just impressive to watch him. He's started multiple 8-figure businesses, ended up raising something like $15 million from venture capitalists, which back in 2015 or whatever, $15 million first round of capital is like an insane amount of money. It's less insane in today's world of $350 million first rounds, but back in the day, that was incredibly impressive. And he's since made a name for himself as a storyteller in a format that is like near and dear to my heart around punchiness and consumability. He has 150 plus thousand followers and is known for some really incredible storytelling on Twitter. So I don't know if I missed anything, Jesse, if there's anything else you want to share about yourself, but yeah, I'd love to start talking about these 3 circles.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, great. The first 3 that I'm going to talk about are awareness, narrative, and momentum. But I wanted to ask you some questions about awareness and what that has played into in terms of both the deals that you've been able to raise yourself and as a prolific angel investor now, the deals that you do today or you have done. Feel free to go in either direction. We can talk about the round that you raised for Ampush, which I think was an interesting masterclass in that, or maybe some of the deals that you looked at. But what comes to mind when I talk about awareness in terms of fundraising for founders?
Yeah, sure. I think awareness starts with, and essentially even before pitching or the pitch process is like the nature of your own goals and what you're trying to accomplish. And I think like I'm one of the first people, I think I say it on Twitter all the time, like not every business, most businesses don't even need venture capital. And before you even think about raising, can you build a business that makes more money, like the old school way that generates more revenue than costs and therefore generates a profit and make your runway infinite, right? You start with a dollar a month of profit and you can grow forever essentially. And so I think the first thing with awareness is be careful about putting a square peg into a round hole. Nothing will be more painful than taking a business which generally speaking doesn't have venture scale returns, which we can talk about what that means, and trying to pitch it to a bunch of VCs. And it's not even that by the way, just remember for venture capitalists always like their job is to take meetings. That is their job. So they will take meetings with you. Your job is to build a business and they're completely different jobs. And so just because they'll take meetings with you does not mean that's a productive use of your time. And I think just being aware of what you're building, if you're building an agency, for example, which Ampush started more as a tech company, but really evolved in that way and made 8 figures in profit. Like it was a big business. But it's not a business venture capitalists invest in and has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with who you are. It's no indication of your worth as an entrepreneur, as a person. They go around to endowments and other people and they say, hey, I'm going to write checks into companies. 6 or 7 of them are going to go to zero. 2 or 3 of them are going to maybe go up by multiples of 3 to 5x. And one of them is going to 100x.
Yeah. Yeah.
And doing that, I'm going to get you a return that is 20% on average per year. That's the product they sell to other investors. So they are literally in the kind of like lotto ticket business. They have to believe that a business can have that kind of return to invest in it. If that's not the way you want your business to behave, or that's not what you expect or want for your business, don't waste your time talking to venture capitalists. It's total, have the awareness to know that what you are is not the right fit for them. By the way, that doesn't mean in the future, that's especially important early on. That doesn't mean that if you do build a big business one day, and we bootstrap obviously, and as you said, we actually were mostly selling parts of the company, but like later on, once you build a big business, there's a different type of investor that's considered private or growth equity who doesn't try to 10x everything they invest in. They actually try to 2 or 3x everything they invest in. Those become more real, different types of investor to different life cycle in your business once you've gotten to that point. So I think the awareness for me is always, what are you trying to accomplish personally? What's the goal? What's your goal? What does that mean about the business's goal? So personal goal, business goal, and then what's the right way to support and finance that goal?
Yep.
And that's really the starting point for whether or not you will have a conversation and what types of conversations you have.
Yeah. Let me just unpack a few of those things. And I think this is where I start with a lot of founders is in any of these workshops or coaching or anything you do as you're thinking about what to do. If what you hear makes you realize that you shouldn't be raising venture capital, that is a huge win, like a massive win, because the way media and the way actually education is pushing people into startups, which I love, but more so the hero's journey and the crazy sparkly nature of venture-backed companies is that so many people are getting pushed down this direction that possibly shouldn't be. And so I love that Jesse started there, which is being aware of what type of business you're running and why you're running it is the first step. And then if you can start building the business the right way, we can start thinking about what does it mean for you to make the decision to raise money? And once you've made that decision, so that's what I would transition us to, Jesse, is okay, let's say what you found is that you are making money, or in some cases, you are building a business that necessarily requires investment in order to even get out the starting blocks. And we don't have to debate what that means, but you're getting to this point of, we believe there is a real reason to raise money. How then did you or have you thought about the way founders go about creating a surface area or awareness within the investment community so that they don't
Right.
come in cold in a way that people are like unsure about what they're looking at?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the fun ways to use the concept of investors take meetings for a living is try to get to know and build relationships before you're actually selling them something. And this is something I talk about even for my friends who are recruiting for jobs and stuff. It's once you're in the job market, people are trying to pitch you the job they want you to work on. So whenever they know like they're going to get into it at some point, before they get into it, I go, hey, just go talk to people. They'll be way more honest with you about the pros, the cons. And ultimately, I think there's nothing better than just, my advice, obviously everyone's super busy building your businesses, is try to make it just get 2 or 3 interesting meetings with investors or investor type people a week, somewhat consistently. And so it's not so much that it's killing your calendar, but it's enough that like you're always opening up new doors. By the way, the other cool thing that investors bring when you're not raising money is like, they see everything. They really have a unique perch where you go, oh, tell me about the 10 most interesting things you've seen in e-com, or like, tell me about a customer acquisition strategy you've heard in the last month or two that really surprised you. And they're like, oh, podcasts are crushing it. And you're like, oh, I would have never known that because I don't have the perch that this person has who looks across so many different companies. So
That's
I
right.
think learning to get out there and be interesting and interested and just meeting people is probably honestly it's just the classic networking or getting to know people, events and stuff. I go back and forth on them. If you go to an event, my advice is quality over quantity. Go build 2 great relationships during that event of people you'll stay in touch with, and not 20 handshakes, because 20 handshakes are useless. I think Twitter, I'm happy to answer specific questions about Twitter and building personal brand. It doesn't feel like I would start there. Like I don't, it wasn't something I ran a business for 10 years before I ever did anything on Twitter. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that would be more in
Well,
Twitter.
this is a good point for me to chime in here because I do have a perspective on that. While building the personal brand and getting reach and actually like looking to try to get influence over social media may not be the best goal in mind because it took Jesse many years. And a lot of this, as we'll talk to, is about shortening the timeline. Like, how do we get you in a better place faster? But some of awareness is creating surface area for discovery and also having stuff that people that want to talk about you or do want to share about you actually have stuff to share about you. And it's really about taking advantage of the sawdust. So, like, the sawdust of your actual business, the off-putting of the stuff that you do, you can actually use that in a way to create surface area. So, as you drive progress in your business, as you look to hire and you actually hire great people, as you attract awards, and as you actually construct your own strategy and thought, putting that out there in the world, not necessarily as the goal, can I get this to go viral so that maybe some investors find me, but primarily to say, hey, can I put this in a modality, either on Twitter or on a blog, that allows people, if they are researching me or find out and hear about me, to learn more? Or if my friend Jesse does know the great investor Irene, he can say, like, you know what? I'm talking to this great founder, Jason. You should just read this thing that he put out, or just saw that they hired this great VP.
I think a solid foundation that makes sense. I just wouldn't, I think I've seen a lot of folks who go way too hard, way too early on it. And I think a few pieces of writing or just so you're known online is fine. I think for most people, the way I tell them to start doing Twitter anyway is just to start to find relevant threads where they have some unique actual experience or data and comment them. And that's actually how I started too. Like for the first several thousand followers, I was getting followers just because I would read a thread and I go, oh, in my experience, I saw so and so do this, or here's a thing that was really interesting before I ever started just like blasting threads or content out there, which I think oftentimes people are doing that to deaf ears these days.
Yeah. How do you think about that when it comes to reacting to investor threads? And so this is another thing that Elizabeth talked about, which was warming up a relationship with an investor through interaction on things like Twitter.
Yeah, I think you can. Like, I would just be careful of you could tell when there's like a throwaway comment being made, and you can tell when there's an actual interesting
Yeah.
comment where you learn something and try to be the second category. I don't think asking questions, frankly, if you don't know the person is a particularly effective strategy. I see people do that. So if they don't know you and you're asking them a question on their thread, it's totally hit or miss versus saying, and I also don't think you need to be, I know there's a big thing on Twitter, like being controversial. I don't think you need to be. I think you can say something like, "Hey, this was a thing we learned really early, or this was a lesson I'd add to this. This is another thing that came up like for me when I went through the same thing," and just try to contribute to the conversation in a way that's high quality and of high value.
Yeah.
I think DMing people is fine. Obviously, the group depends a little bit on you guys, how old you are, and your relationships. But the reason I like the 2 or 3 calls a week kind of thing is it's manageable. It compounds over time. Just think about it. If you really did that in one quarter, you'll have talked to 12 times, whatever, 25 to 30 people. And I also think there's like the monkey barring thing, which I find to be far more effective, which is you meet someone and you're, oh, talk about this, what I'm working on. And they go, oh, I know someone who knows something about what you're doing. Oh, cool. Let me talk to that person. And that's for me a much more human way to start to build out versus like Twitter, I think can be somewhat inhuman.
Awesome. Before we move on to narrative, I think you pointed out something and you've talked about it in a way that I think is important, is whether or not you decide to use a strategy of putting some surface area out there or 2 to 3 calls a week, actually both of which I'm big fans of. I think being intentional about it, the way Jesse talked about, is saying, I'm going to try to do this every week consistently. And then actually sectioning off time to think about it, definitive time, so it doesn't bleed through all the stuff that you're doing to actually run your business, I think is really important. So when you talk about these strategies, set them up, think about how you're going to get them done, and then time box them. Make sure that they fit in a nice place within your schedule so that it doesn't affect your core business, which is being a CEO, founder, running a business. Jesse, I wanted to talk about narrative. I think the reason I was excited for you to talk through this is that Elizabeth had set in our last day was like, look, I really think one of the things that is changing here in our new environment is that the bar is quite high. And what that means for her as a really early stage investor is seeing stories that are impactful and are differentiated. I wanted to just open it up to how you think about maybe the pitches that you get as an angel and what is important to you. And then as you think about your own approach to being persuasive and telling stories, the things that you think are most important for founders to get right here.
Yeah, this is a great category. I think the first thing that I would say, this is a very much a learned skill. And there's a lot of people probably thinking to themselves, I'm just not good at selling, or that's not my thing. I'm the engineer, I'm the whatever. And it's like anything. It's the more you practice it, the more you do it, the more reps you get, the better you're going to get at it. And so it really is do it in front of the mirror, do it with your spouse or friend or whatever, because it is a learned and practiced skill. And communication is that. And so is pitching. And so is any kind of form of narrative. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is like the most important thing for narrative and storytelling is actually clarity. And I think that's oftentimes people don't solve for clarity first. And one of the biggest mistakes I see people pitching is like they're using a lot of it. There's like this funny episode of Friends where they introduce Joey to a thesaurus and he's writing this letter so that Chandler and Monica can get an adopted child. And they show him the thesaurus on the computer and he goes, "Oh my God, there's like these huge words that are like make me sound so smart so I can write a really compelling recommendation letter." And he shows the letter and they go, I don't understand what the fuck this says. And he goes, "What was this sentence?" And the sentence was, "We have large hearts." And it was like, they have full size aortic pump or something like that. These huge words being used because he used the thesaurus on every single word. And there you go. They are human prepossessing Homo sapiens with full size aortic pumps. And I think a lot of founders do that. And I think they do that because they're trying to make themselves sound smarter, better, fancier than they need to be. And I think clarity, that the idea that the other person is understanding what you're saying and even pausing yourself and going, "Was that clear? Did you understand it? Did you get what I was saying?" And remember, before you're selling anyone anything, they got to understand it first. If they don't understand it, they ain't going to buy it. So I think that's like the biggest mistake is like people just don't understand it. And they're like, I got a million of these other calls. Like, my wife's calling me. I got to go. I just don't, I'm not even going to engage here. And then I think that the last part of narrative and storytelling, once you've gotten those first couple of thoughts, is why are you doing this? You know, as entrepreneurs, we've made the biggest investment of all. We've put all of our time into this. It's more valuable than millions of dollars. And when I tell stories, I don't usually focus on why you should buy this. And I think oftentimes pitching is, let me sell something to you. I'm going to sell, why is this such a good opportunity? The much more compelling narrative is, why are you doing this? And really making it about who you are. And you're waking up, you go, I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, I'd love to start a business. And I could do an example pitch or something, but like, here, I wanted to find a big opportunity. I thought this is a world I know really well. It started to come to me. Then I did this. Then I called 10 people and I got really excited when they told me this. This concerned me a little bit. But I think really talking about what's gotten you so excited about the opportunity such that you're willing to, and it's okay to say, I think I can make a lot of money doing this. I think this is a space I'm passionate about. It doesn't matter. The authenticity and the truth associated with your own reason for wanting to do it is never going to be, nothing will ever be more compelling than that for another person. And so I think that, of course, we can go through the classic narratives of problem solution, all that different stuff, which are helpful frameworks. And I think I'm valuable and I like to use those frameworks as well. But nothing is more compelling than to say, here's who I am. Here's what's already going through my mind. Here's what I figured out. And here's what I've done. Here's what's got me so excited to spend the next 10 years of my life working on this and why I think it's a big opportunity. And then look at it just a little bit less as like you're sharing your truth. They can agree or disagree. That's up to them. And that's probably has more to do with them than it has to do with you. And that's the other thing about this is a different section. It's not narrative, but like a lot of the investor process is matching. It's like matching to the right fit. It's a little bit more like dating than it is like selling to your customers, if that makes sense. Like selling to your customers, you're like, yo, I got some cool thing. You should buy it. This is a little bit more like dating where you're trying to find the right match for yourself.
I totally agree. I just want to make sure that we recap what I heard you say, because I think these are really important, and don't be afraid to take notes out there. Don't just listen and let it go through one ear and out the other. Think about how you're going to do the things that Jesse is talking about, because it's not just lip service. So the first thing he talked about was that it's a learned skill and it takes work and practice. And I want to make sure that you all understand he's right, both on the written, like materials creation side of things, and also the delivery. I see too many founders create their stuff and their narratives and their decks in a box and don't actually get a lot of feedback, don't iterate on it. And most founders do not practice how they pitch and how they sound. And I find that most founders are overconfident in how good they are at pitching. And in both cases, I think there's probably a combination of overconfidence or not wanting to hear bad feedback. But like in both cases, practice is really important. So I encourage you guys to set a goal for yourself that when you're going to go out, put your first pitch deck out there or narrative, that you make sure you find the 5, 10 people that will read it and give you feedback. And whether it is in front of a mirror or with a spouse or with friends, like just go through the motion of what it means to tell your story. The first time you do that is going to be pretty bad and chunky, and it'll sound clear in your head, but it won't actually be. So that's the first thing. Let's make sure everyone like makes a commitment to doing something like that the next time around. The second one is clarity and simplicity. Not much additional to add other than I want to point out that there is a lot of kind of like imposter syndrome. It's one of the indications of imposter syndrome when founders go into pitching and go into fundraising is that, and not this isn't going to be everyone, but I'm kind of like talking to myself here because I know it showed up when I was trying to pitch. I'm not sure if I belong here, or I don't know if they see me as an equal. I need to show them how well I know this topic and how deeply I understand sales, marketing, climate change, or whatever. And so you start seeing founders try to show their expertise through the story they tell when really people should be trying to impress people with simplicity. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I'd blend through it about how important the you is in the story is like, yeah, people are investing in people, not necessarily just anything else. So making sure that you're a big part of the story is important. And then Jesse also said that there are things that people are looking for. What is the problem? What is the solution? Is it a big market? Who are the competitors? But it isn't an algorithmically generated decision. If it were, they would just have you fill out a form and put in the information, send it through an algorithm, be like deal or no deal. It's still a story. So you need to think about how you tell it in a way that makes them believe that you're the person that is going to actually get this done while also putting in that information. So I think the last thing I'll step away with is that people, when they Google how to do this and they get the frameworks, problem, solution, team, market size, go to market, et cetera, they sometimes they think about it as like, oh, this is my problem side. Here's the problem, solution, whatever. It could be like that, but it probably will be better if you think about, okay, I need to make sure all this stuff exists in my story. How do I tell the story around it? So,
I
Jesse,
I'd add, let me add a couple of things that just came
yeah,
up. You were talking for me, Jason. The icing on the cake, I'd say, or icing to think about. I think everyone on this call is now going to remember the thing of not using fancy words. Why? Because I told a story about friends. The power of being memorable and finding anecdotes that are specific to what you're selling or pitching, and that ability to flex down. Like when you're talking about the problem, you could say finding parking in big cities is hard. That's the problem. You could also say, let me tell you about it. I had my 3-month-old in the backseat of my car. I was circling around San Francisco City. There's these steep hills. It was, man, it was just, my baby was crying. Just think about which one the person is going to remember more, right? Both illustrate the problem in a very clear way, but like the power of examples, anecdotes, the icing that comes along with storytelling as it relates. So, and the broader theme, one of the broader themes there is like, be memorable, be somebody that people are going to remember because it matters a lot. Like it counts for a lot.
I love that. I can't wait to look up the Joey story and incorporate that into future materials. Okay, so we're at 11:45 right now. I wanted to do 5 minutes of Q&A, Jesse, if you still have time, and then
Sure.
let you go. I appreciate it. So I'm gonna have, let's see, Jonathan, did you have any questions that you wanted to send me that went through? Start
Yeah,
there.
there we go.
Oh, I see. Okay. Jesse, this is good. I think this is tactical. Justin Kistner, are you there, Justin? Maybe you can ask the question as you come on. We talk, this is going back to the awareness thing and the warm-up meetings that you were talking about. Fine. Getting a chance to talk to investors before you're pitching. I think all too often with advice, you glaze over how you actually get that done. Hey, Justin, do you mind asking your question for Jesse?
Yeah, I loved your advice about starting a relationship with investors where you're not selling them yet. But what are some good reasons that you can say you should take a call with me, even though they're in the business of taking meetings? How do you stage your reason for your call? What are some reasons you've given?
Yeah, I think I would always fall back on mutual introductions and mutual relationships. By the way, I've cold emailed the CEO of whatever random companies. I've done that for fun and for interest when I was younger. And I think if you have a good reason to cold email someone, I'm all for it. I love doing that. And people cold email me, and that's great. But I think if you remember the 2 to 3 a week, it's a little bit of a journey you're going on. And you may not, the first call you take, maybe with someone who's not, they're 5 rungs out from the middle of the bullseye of what you want, but they can get you 2 rungs in. And so I wouldn't rush to necessarily talk to the one person. I would work my way towards that person, and they will take a call. If I say to Jason, "Hey, you got to meet my friend Justin. He's working on this really cool thing. I think you know something about it. I think you could like," that's the way you want the intro to start, build a relationship, and be patient, I'd say, with that. So yeah, that's how I would do it.
Yeah. And Justin, I'd say there isn't a trick that makes getting someone to talk to you for not fundraising versus to get them to talk to you for an actual like pitch. You're going through the same process. You're going to have to find your way in, something warm, something that makes them interested in talking to you. So unfortunately that isn't the thing. That wasn't like this specific difference. Is like now that makes it much easier to get to them. It just means that if you can do that earlier, you can start building a relationship that when you do go to fundraise, they have a better sense of who you are, they have context, etc. Thanks, Justin. The next thing I want to talk about is Fernando Brustolini. Are you there? Fernando talks about, so Jesse, you mentioned incorporating you in the story. And Fernando's question is, during the pitch, when would be the best time to tell this? Why me? And let me give my thoughts. And I think I'll just give you a second to think about it, Jesse. Take it back to what I was talking about when it came to problem solution, whatever. Just because we say the problem needs to be in there, or because we say the why me needs to be in there, doesn't mean like it needs to be in the very front, or it needs to be in the middle, or you need to conclude with it. I actually think those components of a pitch or a story can come in different times. It's just how you end up telling your story. So my quick answer would be, look, as long as you think about how you tell your story in a natural way, like you're actually building a story, wherever the why me like naturally fits in, make sure that you put it there. I know that's kind of big. Jesse, if you had anything else, feel free, or we can go on.
Yeah, no, I think my answer, the way I would do it, is from the first word you say out of your mouth, which is to like, don't think of it as a section. Think of the why me as a thread that gets pulled through every little part of the entire pitch.
Yeah.
So it's I am Jesse. Here, I grew up in St. Louis. My dad was an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to build a business one day. I wanted to find something with numbers and data, and someone told me to look at digital marketing. And so I started buying ads on Google, and I figured out Facebook was this huge platform. And oh my God, I was early to it. And I'd be like, it is you throughout every little piece of it. And then I found this problem and I got excited about it. And I thought I could come up with a solution. Then I talked to 5 customers, and here's what happened. And then it is you. It's you throughout the whole thing. And it's how you tie yourself into the business itself. It's just, you are the business.
Yep. I do that too. Don't section it off. Make sure that you are in the whole pitch. We're kind of at this mark that I wanted to transition to an exercise, and I want to be respectful of Jesse's time. Jesse, feel free to hang out for the next 10 minutes or not, but everyone just, you can wave your hands and thank him for it. Oh, before you go, Jesse Pujji, one of the best follows on Twitter, JSPUJJI. Highly informative. Great to see how he tells stories. And his most popular tweet is the one that like crystallized the whole advertising, mobile advertising thing for me, which I really appreciated. So follow Jesse. Is there anything else that you want to share around what you're doing? Oh, also Growth Assistant. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but go to his Twitter page. He's got a lot of really interesting things that he's doing, including Growth Assistant, which can be very helpful for startups. Jesse, thanks so much for your time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I think the last thing I'll just end with is just keep going, keep grinding. That's the best advice any entrepreneur could ever give or get.
Awesome. Okay, let's jump back into it. That was our little section on narrative, and we're collecting some of the questions that we didn't get to try to figure out ways to get you guys what you're looking for. We talked about narrative. Now, okay, good. I want to run people through a very tactical exercise that I run founders through, and it's related to the number 2 point that Jesse talked about, which is clarity and conciseness. One of my biggest red flags for founders is when founders come to me and they have 25 slides and I have this 10-slide mark where I'm like, I think you should try to get down to 10 slides. But, it can bleed. I'm not saying there's like, if you get to 11, like they won't accept your application, like in college or something like that. But I'm like, yeah, you should get to 10 slides. And when founders battle me on that and they fight and they say, you can't cut this out. Like, how could I get below 18? To me, that is an incredibly huge red flag that says you don't really know why your company exists. Like you don't know the specific thing that is so important about your company and why you have to be doing this and why the world is going to need this. Cause you'll like, let me throw this slide in because we're doing this and but we're also doing this and that could be interesting in the future. So this idea of being concise comes down to like the words you use, like in the Joey example, but also in how concise and tight the story is. I do have that 10 to 12 slide mark that I push people towards, but does anyone know what a rubber band exercise is? I'll describe it. A rubber band exercise is described like that because if you pull a rubber band, you stretch it beyond what it's comfortable with. When you let go, kind of like repositions itself and is different than what it was. So we talked about the 10 to 12 slide goal. The rubber band exercise that I want you guys to spend, let's call it 4 minutes on, is the 6 slide deck. If you have your decks here, great. Maybe you should know your story really well. This is my push to you to try to get this done while we're here. We'll put a timer up and at the, let's see, 3-minute mark, so 11:57, see what you can get done in 3 minutes. And when I say 6 slide deck, just do bullet points. What would my first slide be? What would my second slide be? Try to get to 6 slides and let's just use this time. Okay, let's get off of it now. So that was like a quick 3-minute exercise. I want to run people through these things because it can be easy for me to tell you, hey, when we get off this call, do it. And then you won't do it. At least now you've started the process of thinking through this. So the rubber band exercise is meant to push you and be like, shit, like what is the most important and what should I cut out? And you start there because I get people to do 6 slides and I say, okay, like, once we get that, do we feel good about that? Then I'm like, all right, I'll give you another 1 or 2 slides to help lubricate between the slides and create a more smoother journey through your story. And remember, don't just say problem, solution, whatever, like actually say in the bullet point, don't try to cram too much in there. So what is the simple point that you would make across 6 points to get your point across and really sell the opportunity? Okay. Let me just talk about the last thing, which is momentum. That was the third thing about getting people across the line, clearing a higher bar, getting them to jump out and skydive with you. It's momentum. Okay. So this is fundraising. You got to think about fundraising like a set of dominoes because you probably heard people talk about like it's hard, it's hard, it's hard, and then it all happens at once. So if this is what it is, of those 2 orange lines, what is the most important thing for us to really unpack? Is it what happens at the end or is it what happens at the beginning? It's the beginning. I would, if we had more time, I'd have people talk to me about this, but it's the beginning. This is where you guys are as you're preparing to fundraise. It's like, how do you set up the circumstances such that you can actually topple that first domino, right? How do you get that done? And this is the situation that we're all in. What you find is someone like Jesse, this is where it's difficult, is that when people give advice and they say 2 to 3 meetings a week, like over 10 years. And when I talk about my own fundraising experience, it was like, my last fundraise was incredibly successful, but it was because like I was preparing for 10 years, like not specifically, but I built a career in technology. I made it a point to help people just because that's how I do it. That's how I am. And I asked interesting questions and I had jobs and I did things and I was in networks. And then when I went to fundraise, it was a really successful fundraise. But what you're trying to do, or what a lot of us are trying to do, is this is like, how do we get this higher bar, this idea of how do we meet a higher bar? How do we clear a higher bar with less time, which is a really challenging and uncomfortable thing to think about. And what I'd leave you with is, does anyone understand this reference? Anyone? I want to send it through the chat so I don't feel weird. No, this is Joel Embiid. His nickname is, anyone? The process. So we are here to think about what the process is that you can set up so that when you know how much time you have left, that you can say, all right, this is a sprint to get as much of what we can get done and shortening that timeline as fast as possible. Okay, so that will be the third day, the final day. As we've mentioned before, we try to jam as much as we can into 3 short hours, and it's not a lot of time to go through it all. But I think the third day will be really important for at least giving you the tools to think about what does that structure and process look like? when you have a short amount of time, what can you get done? So I hope you guys show up for the third day. I hope you share what you've learned today with friends. And if you have a second, maybe you check out my podcast, which I think people have found to be helpful. And yeah, it's also a good way to support content creators is by actually consuming their stuff. Thanks so much, everyone, for showing up. I cannot believe we ended pretty much on time, got everything we wanted to do done. Oh, Dina, hello. Good to see you. Good to see some really great faces. Raul, Nathan, David, lots of Davids. All right, so we'll see you next time.